in my organization, Learn It, we have about 75 people. I think I do a very good job of being transparent around what's going on, um, and sharing as much as we can. I mean, there's certain things obviously you can't share, but in the middle of the year last year, where times were tough, we we were sharing our numbers, and I think when you do that and you talk about some of the changes and the direction you're going, people aren't going to jump ship and leave. They're
Yeah.
going to appreciate what you're doing. And also, this is when ideas start bubbling up. So it's okay. You have to be transparent. You have to be vulnerable, but you be vulnerable with confidence.
Welcome to the How to Not Execute Your Strategy podcast. I'm your host, Tim Ohai. These are the lessons that make you the leader you want to be. Go to timohai.com to learn more. My guest today is Damon Lembi. As a successful CEO and someone that other CEOs turn to for advice, you're going to love the insights from this interview. See the show notes for more information about Damon and to also get access to the leader guide for this episode. Let's get to it. Damon, it's great to have you on the show today. I'm excited about the conversation we're about to have, but also I'm curious what your perspective is going to bring, because not only are you leading an organization, you work with a lot of other organizations and senior level leaders. So I'm expecting you to kind of crack the door open a little bit on what's happening behind those closed doors. How you doing?
Tim, it's an honor to be here. Thank you for having me, my friend.
It's great. Well, let's just dive in. So the question we ask everybody to start off is, tell me about a time you had a strategy that didn't go as planned.
As you know, I've run Learn It, which is a live learning platform, for close to 30 years. It'll be 30 years in June 2025.
It's awesome.
Now, my family was one of the largest real estate companies in the Bay Area for decades. And my dream was always to find a way to kind of interweave the two between Learn It and real estate. So a strategy I came up with my brother about 10 years ago, in honor of my dad as well, was when Learn It's 10-year lease runs out, where we're paying $60,000 a month for real estate, to go out and find and buy an office building and have Learn It owner occupy it. Okay. So we went around. That was our strategy. We went around and we eventually landed on a building. We found it and we closed escrow November 2019.
Oh gosh. Okay?
So think about that for a second.
Oh gosh.
March 20. So we're very excited. We think we got this great deal on this beautiful office building in the financial district of San Francisco. My lease, where I'm paying $60,000 a month, is starting to run out. And March 2020, the pandemic happened. And fast forward to 2025, and that office building, Learn It space, is still unoccupied. We never moved in.
Wow. Oh my gosh. I remember November 2019, I actually had COVID and didn't know it. I had just been in Milan and for a meeting, and flying back from Milan, I sat with these really nice guys who were all in the fashion industry on their way back to New York. And they had all been in Wuhan and then Milan, and they were flying back. And then, one of them had a cough. We had no idea. So you must have been absolutely ecstatic to do this thing with no clue whatsoever of anything being amiss. You're starting to hear stuff in the news. And then I remember the Bay Area just locked down. Everybody, California was one of those states, and especially San Francisco, one of those communities that said, we're not playing with this. We're going to lock it down and shut it down. What was the emotional journey that you went on when it started? When it first started, were you thinking, no, this is temporary? Or were you like, oh no, I need to be battening down the hatches?
I was a little confused at first, right? Like I think everybody was. I mean, I didn't take it as seriously as we probably should have. Probably a week before it completely shut down, I went to a Kiss concert with about 20,000 people there. Some people thought I was nuts. I'm like, nah, it's not a big deal. But then as a week or two progressed later, I thought back to myself, man, that was a really dumb decision. I hope I'm okay. Wow. And then everything just shut down, right? Especially in San Francisco. And I was really concerned because I had a very young daughter, and it was chaos for my business because everything was, I'm not even talking about the real estate part, everything was in person.
Yeah.
and not everything, but about 70%. And I didn't really know what was going to happen because we weren't sure that our clients would pivot from learning communication skills, decision making skills, emotional intelligence to start working virtually. So it was, as it was for everybody, a pretty crazy experience.
So I love this, and I want to stay here because I think this is really critical to talk about the journey that leaders go through when they have all this hope and desire and excitement. So it starts with confusion, like it's not working. What's going on? What came after the confusion? Was it panic or was it something else?
Around the office building, I just didn't know what we didn't know what to do. It was still so brand new. We only had it for a couple months. I was really just much more focused on learn it.
Yeah,
And so the very first thing, and I think this is important, I really wanted to make sure I took care of my people, my employees, and
yeah,
my family, right? So we
yeah,
got
yeah, yeah.
everybody out of there relatively very quickly. And it was so surreal, Tim, because 6 or 8 months later, because San Francisco was on lockdown, so
Yeah.
we didn't even go back into our office space on New Montgomery Street. And when I did go back there with my mask on, with a couple other employees, and they had gloves on, it looked like one of those situations where people left in the middle of like a bomb threat, right? Where there's still cups of coffee and pencils and papers on the floor.
Wow.
And so, number one thing for me was making sure our employees were okay, and then getting together with our executive team and thinking about, okay, how are we going to change our strategy around and execute on it? Fortunately, everybody had their own laptops and everything, and had kind of a work from home opportunities. So we pivoted pretty quickly with that. A lot of our customers at first said, we're going to hold off, we're not going to do anything, but eventually they realized this wasn't going to just switch back overnight.
No.
They started doing training virtually, and a lot of them came back to us over the years and said, Tim, if it wasn't for Learn It, I mean, Learn It was what helped us build our social connection with people. Still, it gave us something to do.
Yeah.
We're working remotely for the first time. Now we're getting to attend these classes, and a lot of times it's with other executives who maybe I'm an individual contributor and this is a senior level executive I've never met before. So it helped with the connection. Everything transitioned relatively smoothly, and I have my team to really thank for that. I mean, there were some bumps in the road, but also, again, going back to the real estate, early on, I got on the phone with my brother and I said, we're just going to have to stop with the tenant improvements because I don't know if we're ever going to go in there. So save money on that.
Yeah.
And some of the learning lessons that I learned from that was, first of all, black swan events are going to happen.
Yeah.
You know, no matter what you do, you can't look for everything. And then the Damon of old would have probably moved us back in at some point, saying, we've already paid all this money, we have to use it. But
Mm.
I've learned, the sunken cost fallacy. I mean, why throw good money after bad? And it just didn't make sense with the way our business has pivoted and changed to ever occupy that as a Learn It location. So, I mean, those are some of the learning lessons.
Those are huge. So I want to unpack a lot of those. I will say this: one of my favorite tests, even for my own decision making, is if I suddenly disappeared and someone came in to replace me as the decision maker, would they keep making the same decisions? And so your sunken cost fallacy is critical because so many people get so caught up in the momentum that they have invested time, energy, resources, people, all these different things, when the best thing to do is simply just pivot, walk away, shut the door, whatever. But I want to go back to, so you were initially confused. You then prioritized short-term stuff immediately. Let's take care of this. I'm going to make a bit of a psychological leap here because I know just from psychological research, fear is a driving factor for how we prioritize. And I'm going to assume there was some fear between the initial confusion and then the prioritization on your people. Would you agree that there was like a holy crap, maybe not full panic, but there was definitely a little lump in your throat between those decisions?
Definitely, there was. I think, fortunately for me, and again, I'm far from perfect,
Yeah,
but when really tough things happen, I'm able to kind of slow down and look at it, and
this is
and
where I
not
want to go.
and not get crazy and just jump at the first response. You know, I
How
mean,
did you
some
learn that? Because that is right in the middle of probably what this episode is going to be about, because that slowing down and not overreacting or reacting out of fear, because you pivoted from fear to servant leadership. You immediately went from let me take care of my team. So not every leader does that. People could go into survival mode and they're worried about, me, myself, and I. So where did you learn how to be like that? Is that just that you were born that way?
No, I wasn't born that way. I think a lot of it has to do with making mistakes.
Mm,
And I feel like I'm a lot like my father, who is my idol. I lost him to cancer in 2010. He was a pretty emotional guy.
mm,
Um, and what I mean by emotional is he was a risk taker,
mm,
and he would just jump in and do things. And
mm.
sometimes those things didn't work out.
Yeah.
And early on in my leadership career, I would kind of be the same way. I would just jump in and react. And what I learned over time is the immediacy of that, Tim, doesn't have to happen right away. Sometimes you have time. So take a step back, reflect, even if it's for I remember there was a time we were moving things around the office late at night, and one of the helpers cut himself and started
Mm,
bleeding, and people freaked out. But I said, let's take a minute. I went downstairs, I called 911. We got him, so some reason, some way or another, I've found ways to like take a step back, think about what are my options here.
mm,
It's important to be curious,
mm.
and see what your options are. And I've also studied a lot about decision making, problem solving, talk to other people, and so I think it's definitely a learned skill. Um, not definitely not something I was born with.
That's so powerful. If you were like most leaders, you learned how to execute strategy through trial and error, and your teammates learned the same way, if they've even learned it at all. The result is that how we execute our strategies generates massive waste and fatigue. But it doesn't have to be this way. If you'd like to master how strategies execute, go to timohai.com/masterclass now. You'll find everything I use to help my clients thrive all in one power-packed place. Don't you think it's time to invest in yourself? All right, back to the interview. If I were to summarize what I've heard, there's a couple things going on. One, you got neutral right away. And that's, to me, that's fundamental to the whole thing. If you can't be neutral, you can't see what the problem is. You can't come up with options. You're just immediately just going to react and arguably justify your reaction, whether it was right or wrong. And you'll tell yourself, "Oh, I did what the only thing I could do." And there was an intentionality that you brought to that situation, and I know you well enough to know that you do that in life in general. When you think about other leaders that you work with, how often do you see this kind of self-awareness in their leadership styles and in the leadership styles of the people who work with them?
That's a very good question. I think that the best leaders have a high level of self awareness. Um, I see a lot of leaders who don't have self awareness, and they come across, and I'm like, man, I wish you could just look in the mirror about how you're behaving, whether it's overreacting or whether it's how you're treating people, or whether you're what I like to say a learn it all versus a know it all. But I think
Mm,
great leaders have self awareness, and it's something I've really worked hard personally on. And the second part of that answer to that question is I think if you're leading an organization or a team or even a sports team, if the leader is modeling self awareness, you're going to see much more of it take place with their team as well. Because you're always on stage as a leader, right? And
mm.
so people are going to look to you, how you're behaving, how you're going about things. And a lot of times they'll behave that way as well.
So you don't see it as common as it should be. When it's there, it literally is a multiplying or an exponential type of factor to what the rest of the team can do. Take us back to when you were trying to change your strategy from what you originally were going to do with the real estate. How did your energy, your presence, draw the best out of other people on your team? Because you mentioned you had a lot of good people who helped you figure all that stuff out. It wasn't all Damon's plan and Damon's ideas and Damon's, leadership that solved it. It was really the group that brought it to life. Walk us through that.
So as far as the real estate, my team wasn't really involved. I mean,
Okay.
we talked about the decision not to move in, right?
Yeah.
Because some of them said, well, we could still offer public classes in San Francisco. And I said, well, think about it. What is our core initiative? I didn't just give them the answer, Tim. I said,
Mm.
think about what is our, I asked an open-ended question. And they said, well, we have now with our virtual offering, we're looking to move to a subscription model. I said, now how would that work if we're trying to, attract clients all over the country and we only had public classes in San Francisco? And they said, doesn't work at all. Good point. Right. So you help lead them to that decision instead of just jumping in and giving them the answer. Now, as far as Learn It overall, pivoting to a remote first uh, type classes, virtual classes, I leaned heavily on my team, and I think that when it comes to execution and when it comes to just being a great leader, you have to be humble enough to know I don't have all the answers. I'm not the one developing the product and sitting in the classes all the time. So why am I trying to say this is what we should do, this is what should we not do? So I kind of sat back again. I got curious. I brought the right people in the room and I said, let's hash it out. Let's have conversations. And I think comes with that is conflict. Some people think certain ways than others, but if you can have healthy conflict and everybody could walk away, leave the room, still knowing, hey, we're still friends, we're still coworkers, everybody was heard out. I think we did a fantastic job with that. And that's what really helped us come to the conclusion, because not everybody got their way. Not everybody did. But we made the decision and then we all agreed once those decisions came about and moved forward with it.
This is so good. So there's a couple of things that are literally like textbook examples of great leadership. First, the strategy for the building became the strategy for the business, but it wasn't ever intended to do that. So that's my thing around strategy, is a series of decisions. So when we think about our strategies and even our strategic plans, which even make us more black and white than we should be, we have to know decisions can and probably need to be undone sometimes. And when they're undone, lesson number 2, now your team becomes critical to redoing or rebuilding whatever it's going to become, because you were all invested on one strategy. There's like, I guarantee you 6 months before that, you weren't thinking about how do we take our business to a subscription virtual model at all. And yet that's how you're thriving. You're growing dramatically because of that crisis opportunity turned into a transformative growth catalyst for Learn It. When you also then bring in the group, I love the transparency. I love the ability to say, look, everybody's going to have a voice, but not everybody gets to make the final decision. That's my decision as the business leader and the business owner to do that. But I don't want to do it in a vacuum. How often do you see organizations start well? And this is now we're going to go behind the door, closed doors of other organizations, where they have this great idea, but because there's not enough transparency, because there's not enough open communication, there's not enough two-way communication, the idea chokes on its own air.
I see it a lot. Before I get there, one of the things you were talking about is, yeah, we had the strategy and then it completely changed. For your listeners out there, sometimes life happens, things change, and you need to work within your constraints. And sometimes things can turn out even better. I mean, I call it, I have this little term called possibility spotting. And so finding other possibilities within these really challenging, tough times. And that's where this whole virtual training subscription model came from. And it's been a game changer for our business. And we would have never went down that route. So you have to be open and be curious and also kind of resilient and thinking about, okay, we have no choice. I mean, there's nothing we can do about this. So let's pivot and grow. Now, that's my first point. My second point is I see it all the time, where sometimes people have great strategies, or at least they think they have a great strategy, but they're not bringing in all the right stakeholders. They're not even asking people to be involved. And so what happens is you roll out this plan or this strategy, and then you have somebody from accounting or IT or some other group, and you're like, this isn't going to work. How can this possibly work? And maybe it could work, but they feel left out or upset because they weren't involved, and it falls flat on the face and never gets off the ground.
So I literally just talked about this on one of my videos on YouTube. It's a short one around this idea of dependencies, and it's literally one of the most common themes in my coaching practice around most ideas, most quote strategic initiatives haven't thought through the dependencies well enough. And to your point, there's usually a group or multiple groups who weren't brought into the ideating to say, look, that's a great idea, but if you're going to do this, it's going to require this budget's going to require this data, it's going to require, and we don't have that data, it just doesn't exist. We'd have to create it from scratch, or we'd have to overhaul the system in order to start collecting that data. And people continuously underappreciate the importance of dependencies. When you think about how leaders, your own leadership, as well as other leaders you work with, how common is it for senior executives to have the idea and just toss it over the wall and say, you guys just figure it out and just make it work, as opposed to, let me hand deliver this to you, sit down with you, crack it open, and before we hit the launch button, walk me through what's going to keep this thing from coming to life. Give me that compare contrast.
I would say, I'm trying to put a percentage on it.
Yeah.
I would say, I mean, it happens. Different organizations. I mean, one of the great things about Learn It is I get to see behind the curtain with how a lot of these organizations work.
Yeah.
And obviously, I'm not going to
Yeah,
say something. Of course. But I would say 60-40 with our customers. At least 60-40, they do it the right way. Because keep in mind, when companies are investing in their people and their training, they're pretty much open to ideas. But I was thinking about the 40%. There's this one customer we've been trying to help for a long time, and it starts at the C level, and it's all around their strategy for hybrid work. And yeah. I'm sure we talk about this all the time, but it's like they've changed their strategy on hybrid work I'm not kidding, a dozen times over the last couple of years. Wow. And it's awful. And we work with their CHRO, and she's like, we're losing great talent because we're not communicating. We have the senior leaders who are just throwing it over the fence saying, we want everybody to come back to work 4 days a week while they're in Montana, most of the time. And there's really no clear guidelines, and people are leaving, and it's really frustrating, and it's hurting the business. So I've seen it gone really well with a lot of our customers, and then there's some really poor implementation of some of these strategies. And I think a lot of it has to do with people are just wondering, why are we doing this, and how is it going to benefit, myself, but also our organization.
So let's go down this, and I want to get into the how. How do you, as a leader, maintain that access, that approachability, that communication, that two-way communication we talked about with your team, so that you don't get caught up in the same dysfunction? What are the things that you literally do, Damon, that help people know that not only they can share information with you, but they also see you doing something with it?
It's the same thing we try to coach and teach our customers on. It starts with coming up with whatever your strategy or your game plan is. So think it through, get the right, whether you want to call them dependencies, stakeholders, whatever, in the room, and kind of talk through, create a psychologically safe environment, which we also spoke about, where people can kind of hash it out, and then you come up with whatever plan it is, and you decide how you're going to move forward with it. And then a lot of it comes down to, Tim, I believe, communication and being transparent. In my organization, Learn It, we have about 75 people. I think I do a very good job of being transparent around what's going on, and sharing as much as we can. I mean, there's certain things obviously you can't share, but in the middle of the year last year, where times were tough, we were sharing our numbers. And I think when you do that and you talk about some of the changes and the direction you're going, people aren't going to jump ship and leave. They're going to appreciate what you're doing. And also, this is when ideas start bubbling up. So it's okay. You have to be transparent. You have to be vulnerable, but you be vulnerable with confidence. So that's what we're trying to do. Like, okay, I need your help with this. Maybe we made this mistake, but we're going to figure this out. And I'm going to need your help to help figure this out together. So really, that is what we help our customers do. And I think that that's something that we do a pretty good job. Not perfect, but as far as being transparent, being vulnerable, and over communicating. I think you need to over communicate. And for your listeners out there, if you're a leader, communicate in different ways. Communicate through your Slack channel, communicate through email, communicate through having one-on-one conversations, team meetings. You got to over communicate the message and whatever your goal is, and give people the opportunity to ask questions.
How do you know when you've communicated enough, or how do you know when your communication is working?
Your communication's working when I like to, have conversations with people and say, hey, we're rolling out this plan. What do you think of it? And can you kind of share with me, direction we're going? And they can, and again, it's about asking open-ended questions where I'm not jumping in and giving them the answers, and letting them, share back what's happening. And also, your communication's working when, let's say it's an elaborate project and you're actually hitting your milestones and things are going okay,
Mm-hmm.
right? And people are talking about it and they're getting involved, instead of, again, goes back to confusion and frustration. Well, I don't even know why we're doing this or what's going on, or this doesn't make any sense to me. The water cooler talk, and I think it's important. I mean, if you're running a massive organization, maybe you're not communicating with people at that level, but your leaders are and your team members are. And I think it comes down to, I've found that great leaders also, Tim, know how to receive feedback. I know you and I talked about that, I think, on my podcast, but people need to be able to come to you with feedback, because that will help you to see if your communication is getting through or not. But if you don't receive feedback well and you get defensive, then people aren't going to come talk to you. They're just going to be like, this guy doesn't get it, Damon. I'm not going to get my head bitten off by him. I'm just going to go about my business, keep my head down, and get my paycheck.
I love it. I don't have research that I can immediately draw in my brain, but I know from just observation, when we as leaders aren't good at communicating and aren't receiving feedback, and to your point, when you said, people are like, they're confused, they don't know what's going on, we trigger fear in them. And when we trigger fear in them, they start making their own priorities, because they're now going to do what's best for them, because they don't feel they can trust that you as the leader or the leadership team has their best interests at heart. And because of that, now we start seeing a snowball effect of waste and bad decision making, and things start to, literally, that's the beginning of the initiative dying, in my experience.
Yeah, if you don't communicate and you're not transparent, people make up their own decisions in their head, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of times they're going in directions that are darker or worrisome because they
Yeah.
don't really know what's going on, So, and they got to look out for themselves, and they got to, they have mortgages to pay, kids to take care of, and they're like, hey, I really enjoy this company. At least I think I did, but I got to make sure I can pay the bills here, and so maybe I need to leave, find something else. Or they start having conversations, and it's a ripple effect. Like, hey, so I know it's hard, but communication and feedback, you just got to be consistent, and you're better off over communicating than under communicating.
That's so good. That's so good. This has been phenomenal. The second question is, what are 2 or 3 things that you think leaders should have? We've covered so many great things, but let me just ask, is there anything else we haven't talked about that you would like? I really want to add this to we'll add this to the soup pot, to give it that extra flavor.
Well, 3 attributes I think I found in great leaders, especially when it comes to execution and decision making, which I love decision making. I think it's such a fascinating science, and we already talked about it, being humble, right? You don't have all the answers. You can't figure it out on your own. Number 2, adaptability. You have to be adaptable. I mean, I love that old saying, Mike Tyson, everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the face.
Yeah.
Right. So you need to be able to go new directions, new opportunities. So you have to be adaptable. And whether it's on my podcast or the thousands of leaders I've dealt with over the years, I've never come across a fantastic leader, Tim, who is a victim. Accountable. You need to be accountable, take ownership, and you also need to be able to hold your team members accountable. So I think that those are the 3: humble, adaptable, and accountability.
How do you get that DNA into your leadership bench? How do you recruit it? Do you teach it? Do you coach it out of them? How do you get that on your leadership bench strength?
First and foremost, it starts with you and the other senior leaders. I mean, you need to model those behaviors. And then a lot of it comes down to whatever your values are as an organization. And it starts with the recruiting process. Now, somebody might be sitting here listening saying, okay, well, fantastic. But I mean, I already have my team here. So these are, this is what I'm working with. So lead by example, coach them. And when at all possible, when it comes to recruiting, I've always been big on hiring for aptitude and attitude over experience when you can. Right now, I'm not talking about hiring a very senior project manager who doesn't have any project management experience, or a COO for $100 million company. But if you can bring in these individuals, whether they're earlier in their career, or maybe they're going from accounting and they want to get into project management and it's a new thing for them, but they have that insatiable appetite for learning and growing and trying things, hire those people, nurture them, coach them, bring them in, give them opportunities to learn and grow. And over time, you'll be able to develop that type of organization, a learning organization, I like to call it, where people will grow and adapt and change and hold each other accountable and be a great team.
That's so good. Damon, that's really, really practical and incredibly valuable insight. I can't add anything to it. I don't want to add anything to it. I love what you've shared today. Thank you so much for being a guest. And more importantly, thank you so much for the work you do, because Learn It is a gold mine for organizations who want to change how they lead and ultimately how they execute.
Thank you for having me, Tim. And most of all, for being my friend. I know. I mean, you're one of my new friends in 2024, which meant a lot to me. So thanks for having me here today.
That's awesome. All right, man. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed that interview and got some solid takeaways. Here are 3 that I'd like to highlight. 1. When stressful situations happen, serve first. This puts you in servant leadership mode, which automatically taps into the best part of your brain. If you go into survival mode, your decision-making will be fear-driven, which is never good. 2. Being strategic is about making the best decision for the moment right now. If you cannot let go of your plan, you will miss the growth opportunities that the chaos might have just given you. You will literally be clinging to the past at the expense of your future. 3. Transparency will actually reduce fear, not increase it. We often think that bad news will cause a negative reaction. On the contrary, communicating in tough times not only increases understanding, it increases confidence. When our teams have understanding and confidence in the why, they will figure out the how. In closing, there are 3 things that I would ask of you. First, follow me on LinkedIn and subscribe to my LinkedIn newsletter. You'll get even more content that will both challenge and inspire you every week. Second, please share this podcast with at least one other person right now. And third, hit those rating stars on whatever platform you downloaded this podcast. When you do that, it raises the visibility of what we are talking about to people just like you. Holo mua, onward and upward.